Ireland, Norway and Spain have announced that they will recognise Palestinian statehood. Israel has long opposed such international recognition for the Palestinian territories, and the move will increase the diplomatic isolation generated by its military offensive in Gaza. Israeli reaction was swift and furious. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is completely opposed to an independent Palestinian state and said the announcement amounted to a reward for terror that would threaten his country's security. 139 of the UN's 193 members already recognise Palestinian statehood, but today's announcement carries weight because most Western European countries have held back from establishing diplomatic relations with an independent Palestine.
Barred off from Israel by fences and barriers, the Palestinian territories will be formally recognized as a state by 3 more European countries. Spain, Ireland, and Norway choosing to support the Palestinian push for sovereignty, a step they say towards peace.
The time has come to move from words to action, to tell the millions of innocent suffering Palestinians that we are with them, that there is hope, and to make it very clear that no matter how many walls are erected, no matter how many villages are bombed, and no matter how many illegal settlements are built, the land and the identity of Palestine will continue to exist in our hearts, in international legality, and in the future project of a Mediterranean in harmony.
Previously, 139 of 193 UN countries recognized the state of Palestine. Latest signatories calling on others to do the same.
In the midst of war, with tens of thousands of dead and injured, we must keep alive the only thing that can provide a safe home for both Israelis and Palestinians. 2 states that can live in peace with each other, Israel and Palestine.
Germany's foreign minister rejected unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood.
I have repeatedly made it clear that a solution to this terrible situation that we are currently experiencing does not require symbolic recognition, but a political solution. A solution to the Middle East conflict and a 2-state solution requires direct negotiations on both sides.
Israel's government also hit back.
Regarding a Palestinian state, there are people who support this opinion and there are people who do not. But this is not the place nor the time now to come and unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. And any such decision harms Israeli sovereignty and Israeli security, and we will not allow it. I ordered to recall our ambassadors back home, and we will take all measures to prevent that.
President Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, welcomed the recognition and called on other nations to, quote, support the struggle of our people for liberation and independence.
Well, Daniel Levy is president of the US Middle East Project. That's a non-profit organisation that focuses on the Israel-Palestinian conflict and aims to promote peace. He was part of the Israeli team of negotiators that took part in the Oslo Peace Accords process in the 1990s and advised former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. Welcome to DW. Can we start with your reaction to this announcement?
One, I guess, primarily wonders what's taken so long for countries that are committed to 2 states, and why are these countries relatively isolated among the European states who are yet to recognize Palestine? And then one wonders what next? Because the act of recognition, as long as it remains just that, is rather symbolic. The state that they have recognized is under an occupation in which there are daily violations of international law. So will these, and indeed the states that have not recognized Palestine, begin to hold Israel accountable for those violations? And if not, why should we expect anything to improve, anything to change, and for there to be still a prospect of the 2-state outcome, which even those who have not recognized, such as the German foreign minister, have said that they endorse? And so I think that becomes the question.
So when I spoke to the Norwegian foreign minister earlier today, put some of those points to him, and one of the things that he said was that, will this adds to the pressure on Israel, recognizing that this is somewhat symbolic until the United States shifts its position?
Well, I think he's correct that it adds to a sense of isolation's too strong a word, but of Israel losing some of the support of even its friends. The Israeli reaction has been somewhat hysterical, but I think that's partly performative as a way of hoping that one can intimidate and pressure these countries not from doing more and other countries not from following suit. Yes, I think the Norwegian foreign minister and others are correct to suggest that where the real heavy leverage resides is with Washington, D.C. But, and it's an important but, to say, well, you know, the only people who can do anything are the Americans is an abdication of responsibility. That's not the approach that one takes on Ukraine or elsewhere, where America is going to have a disproportionate influence. So I think it is up to every state to ask itself, is Israel making conditions impossible for Palestinian statehood? Is Israel, and this was the response, by the way, of an Israeli minister, foreign minister until recently, he said, between the river and the sea, and by the way, I'm quoting him verbatim because I know people sometimes get upset about that expression, but it's one the Israelis use. From the river to the sea, there is only one state, and that is Israel. So he is basically saying, we have apartheid, Palestinians will never have their rights. And what is the reaction of those who've recognized and those who haven't recognized to what Israel is doing? I would argue that it's not just up to America. Israel needs to be held accountable, needs to be sanctioned for its actions by a cross-section of countries who claim to uphold international law. Because, number one, that is what will have Israelis not saying, oh, thank you, you know, now we'll give the Palestinians what they want. But it will have Israelis saying, is there a cost for this?
Right.
What is the equation here? What's the incentive structure? And it, of course, also creates a different environment in which the Americans operate.
OK, we'll just pick up on one of the points you made there when you talk about apartheid, a term that, of course, has been contested in the Israeli context. But I did want to ask you about one of the reactions that I think you've called as hysterical. We have Benjamin Netanyahu describing the announcement as a reward for terrorism. It's easy to see what he means, don't you think? Hamas launches a terror attack on Israel. Israel retaliates. And then these European countries, from the safety of thousands of miles away, choose to recognise Palestinian statehood.
Well, I think that what you've seen in the Israeli reaction, and of course history didn't begin on October 7th. October the 7th was a shocking violation of international law. What Israel does every day prior to that were violations of international law. What Israel has done subsequently has led also to arrest warrants being recommended by the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and to provisional measures being called for the prevention of irreparable harm to Palestinians by the International Court of Justice, considering a genocide case. So this does not come in a vacuum. Now, have those countries withdrawn their recognition of Israel as a consequence of its violations of international law? No. Are they therefore rewarding terrorism by going forward with this recognition? Also no. By the way, Phil, I would prefer that they had recognized and others had recognized long ago and had taken other measures. I cannot prove the counterfactual, but I think that had Israel not been indulged and allowed to get away with this for so long, it would not have had the hubris to create a situation which doesn't justify October 7th, but made it more likely, and you wouldn't have the kind of extremists in the Israeli government who have been out to provoke from day one. And so the longer we wait to take these measures, the more likely we are to see more violence. And that's why non-violent measures like this, like sanctions, are what Palestinians and Israelis need.
Let's talk about the state of Palestine, so to speak. Are the 139 countries that currently recognise Palestine, plus, of course, today's three, are they all recognising the same lines on the map? Viewers are now looking at a map of the region based on pre-1967 demarcations. Are we all talking about the same thing?
It's such an important question, Phil, and I'm very glad that you asked, because even the exact wording of the statements coming out of the three slightly varied. So I think that what one needs to recognize, if one's going to recognize two states, is either the 1967 lines or indeed the UN partition plan of 1947. I think most are leaning into the 1967 lines. That's the map that you shared with us. But the Norwegians, for instance, kept open the option of land swaps in the context of negotiations.
Right.
And this comes to the issue of, do we know what we're recognizing and what are we doing subsequent to the recognition? The reality today is there is one political space, one state in which there are unequal rights. To undo that really requires ending the occupation. It shouldn't require too much negotiation.
Well, Norway's Minister of Foreign Affairs is Espen Barth Eide, and he joins us now from Oslo. Well, welcome to DW. What do you hope this move will achieve?
Well, this is a statement from 3 European countries, very clearly saying that this is the right thing to do, but also the right moment, the right time, because we want to contribute to re-establishing a credible faith in and a credible path towards a two-state solution, and a Palestinian state living in peace beside Israel, which has been the dream since the original Oslo Accords. But what we also realized isn't just sitting idly by, waiting for the sides to negotiate this at the time of their own making forever, has not worked for 30 years. And we need to strengthen the position of the Palestinian side, but still trying to seek a two-state solution where both peoples can live in peace. And we do that together today. We hope other European countries will follow. And we also do this as a support to the Arab peace vision for a comprehensive solution to the Middle East crisis.
OK, so just so I'm clear, you've done this because you think it's the right thing to do, and in terms of practical achievements, you hope to strengthen the Palestinian position and provide support for Arab countries. And what will you recognise on May the 28th, I think it is? Borders on a map, a political entity? What will you actually do?
Well, remember, there are institutions in place. There is a state of Palestine, as it's called, which is the Palestine Authority, based in Ramallah in the West Bank, which has some control over the territory in West Bank and in East Jerusalem. Unfortunately, not so much in Gaza, not only because of the war, but because Hamas took over control there. But there is a Palestinian entity that has a position also in the UN, not as a full member, but as a non-state observer. And this is the entity that we recognize. That, again, is based on the promise of PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, back in the 90s, to give up the armed struggle, to continue only through peaceful means. And that's a promise that they've actually held. And they have systematically, these more moderate Palestinian in their Palestinian administration, have been true to that premise. They've even collaborated extensively with Israel on security issues in the West Bank. But their capacity have been weakened by an ever-growing amount of illegal Israeli settlements, for instance, and it's been really hard to run that proto-state, and we want to lift their authority, but also to lift their capacity.
And how much was this decision influenced by Israel's current war against Hamas?
This is a reaction to not only the current war against Hamas, but to the situation that we have seen over years. I mean, we've seen the expansion of settlements. We've seen very limited progress or no progress in cooperation towards the settlement. We've seen the terror attacks from an extreme group, Hamas, on Israel. We have seen the very violent response from Israel into Gaza. We see the settler violence in the West Bank. This is a violent spiral which will continue if we do not break this cycle. So we want to break out of this cycle of eternal violence and re-establish faith in an alternative, which is a peaceful settlement where a Palestinian state is recognized as part of a broader comprehensive plan. And we think the time is now, and we think that everything has happened is inspired by exactly that.
So Hamas celebrated your move today. Israel recalled its envoy from Oslo in protest. So, and we have the foreign minister today saying that Ireland and Norway intend to send a message today to the Palestinians and the whole world: terrorism pays. He also said this recognition would impede efforts to return Israel's hostages being held in Gaza and make a ceasefire less likely because you've rewarded the jihadists of Hamas. I'd like your response to those points, please.
Well, I totally and completely disagree with those statements. We are doing exactly the opposite. We are recognizing the moderate forces, the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, the people who have renounced violence, who are the enemies of Hamas. This is absolutely an anti-Hamas move. It was welcomed by the Palestinian Authority, by key Palestinian leaders, by key Arab states, precisely as a recognition that there are still moderate forces who are willing to look for a peaceful settlement. This is not what Hamas wants, because they want their fight is against the existence of the State of Israel. The Palestine we recognize is a Palestine that recognizes formally and in practice the existence of Israel and wants to live in peace and cooperate with Israel. So this is exactly the opposite of what the Israeli foreign minister says. And I think this will move forward to a situation where at the end of the day, it will be better to be both an Israeli and a Palestinian, because this endless cycle of violence is broken.
Israel's foreign minister also said today that your country's ambassador will be summoned for reprimand talks, during which they'll be shown a video of the abduction of female Israeli soldiers on October the 7th. What will your instruction to your ambassador be?
You know, they have said a lot of things about our ambassador. They've recalled their own ambassador. We have no intention of doing anything of that sort. So, of course, when he is asked to come to the ministry, he will politely come and he will see what they want to show them. And I don't think he needs to learn more about the horrible terrorist attacks on 7th of October. We have seen these images, which are terrible, just as we are seeing all the horror that is being experienced by the civilian population of Gaza. There is too much violence, and some of that violence happened on the 7th of October and was absolutely reprehensible. So I think that response, I mean, he will be there. I will also tell the very nice person who is the Israeli ambassador to Oslo, who is actually the ambassador I have met most frequently as foreign minister, that when he comes back from his stay in Israel, he will be invited to a nice cup of coffee in my office and we'll talk about things.
OK, thank you so much for sparing us the time on what must be a very busy day for you, Norwegian Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
OK, let's get more from DW's Rebecca Ritters in Jerusalem and Jack Parrock, who is joining us from Brussels. Jack, 3 European countries, they're recognising Palestinian statehood. Can you tell us what this means exactly?
Well, it is a political statement and it's also a very symbolic one, obviously. The Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, when he made the announcement in Madrid earlier today, he said that the recognition serves to tell the Palestinians, we are with you. Simon Harris, the leader in Ireland, he said that it's a recognition of the Palestinian people to their right to self-determination. It is a really significant move for the 3 countries. It is symbolic. They're not necessarily the biggest diplomatic powers of Europe, but they have been they've been saying that they're going to do this for some time. All of them, it will come into force, this recognition, on May the 28th. There were other countries. Belgium was perhaps going to be expected to do this alongside them. We do know that there are moves here in Belgium to make a similar announcement, and indeed potentially in France as well. Now, although it is symbolic, it is also significant because Arab countries have said that they will only be involved in the sort of policing of a reconstruction of a post-war Gaza if Western nations recognise a state in Palestine. So the more countries that do that, the more support that there would be from those Arab nations to fund, firstly, a post-war Palestinian state.
OK. And looking at reactions from Israel, Rebecca, Israel has now recalled its ambassadors to the 3 countries. What else is Israel doing and saying?
Well, this announcement has drawn fury from Israel, probably unsurprisingly to most viewers. Israel completely opposes the decision that has been announced, this joint decision by Spain, Ireland and Norway. Benjamin Netanyahu has long said that establishing a Palestinian state would be an existential danger to Israel and been standing against it, certainly since the war that began on October 7. As you mentioned, the ambassadors to those three countries have been recalled and they are looking at further measures. The Finance Minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has called for further punitive measures and said that he will be withholding tax that Israel collects and then gives to the collects for the Palestinian Authority and then hands over. He'll be withholding those taxes and they'll be looking at further punitive measures. Now, in response to this, the Foreign Minister this morning said that it sends a message to Palestinians and to the world that terrorism pays. He also said that it will harm efforts to retrieve the remaining hostages inside Gaza. So a very strong reaction from Israel. On the Palestinian side, we've seen a much more positive response, obviously. The Palestinian Authority, who have always been fighting for a two-state solution, have reacted positively, and Hamas has also come out to say that they think that this is a step in the right direction.
OK, and all of this is happening just a couple of days after the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, of course, announced that he's seeking arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister and for the Israeli Defence Minister. So is all of this pressure, Rebecca, having any effect on Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, I know there's no doubt that pressure is mounting on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government and Israel on the international stage. There's absolutely no doubt about that. This week, particularly, the pressure has been mounting, and we are seeing that it's having an effect on the government, on representatives here, on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself. We can see that in the way that everyone is responding, both to the ICC news on Monday and to today's decision, pretty much across the board. Bipartisan responses to these announcements, particularly, of course, the ICC that was, everyone on both sides of government were saying that that was an outrage. So pressure definitely mounting. But when we look at how much that might affect Benjamin Netanyahu's decision and the way that he's planning this war going forward, I think we won't see much change. We won't see it affect. He is really fighting for his political survival, and that really means also continuing this war in Gaza. That is something that he's been saying that his government are adamant that they are going to do, that they are going to continue with this Rafah offensive, that they are determined to dismantle Hamas and retrieve the hostages, and that nothing will stop them. So he doesn't want to face the day after, because that is when he said that they will investigate and look at the wrongdoings and that led up to October 7, and he knows that that will be a very difficult situation for him.
All right. Jack, I just wanted to ask you, what about other European countries? I mean, will any more now potentially recognise Palestinian statehood?
It's likely that they probably will, potentially Belgium, potentially France. What's really interesting about this, well, it shows the ever-deepening rift between Israel and some of its traditional Western allies. It also shows the divisions among some EU member states. Now, the European Union's position has always and long has been to work to its two-state solution. Many of the EU's countries feel that the recognition of a Palestinian state is the end of the negotiations of that goal of making a two-state solution. What we're seeing now is certain countries, Ireland, Norway and Spain, obviously saying that for them, this is the starting point now. Countries like Germany, for instance, wouldn't allow that to go. So now we're seeing some of those divisions really start to play out in Europe.
Let's bring in Laura Blumenfeld. She's a Middle East analyst and New York Times bestselling author who joins us from Washington, D.C. Good to speak to you, Laura. Now, just looking at this news, what changes as a result of these countries recognizing a Palestinian state?
Well, listen, recognition doesn't answer any of the hard questions. I can tell you that as a former senior policy advisor on the Israeli-Palestinian negotiating team for the State Department under President Obama. I mean, we have to determine borders, security, refugees, Jerusalem. Recognition is symbolic, and I guess it was a 3-for-1 kind of deal for these countries because they were able to recognize Palestine, reprimand Israel, and also kind of give a little razz to the United States for handling or perhaps mishandling what they see are Middle East negotiations until now.
And the response from Israel, of course, we've seen Israel recalling its ambassadors, but Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says this move, the recognition, rewards terrorism. How would you assess that statement?
Netanyahu is feeling increasingly isolated, and there's a kind of undertone of violence to his language, especially on a day like today where they released the hostage tape of the young 19-year-old female soldiers who were bloodied and bound by Palestinian gunmen. The way that Netanyahu has put it is he says, we won't let them ram a Palestinian state down our throats. And it's really troubling. But again, this just feeds his narrative of isolation and doesn't clear the path forward. Unfortunately, that's why the United States says the best way forward is through direct bilateral negotiations, rather than jamming an end game on either side.
So in essence, you're saying Netanyahu's further pushed Israel into further isolation with his response?
Well, I think Netanyahu has taken a position of, with you or without you, I'm going into Rafah. I'm going to prosecute this battle for total victory. It kind of reinforces his paranoia. The Israelis need reassurance after October 7th. The Palestinians need respect, but real respect means real results. Unfortunately, by declaring independence, it doesn't really create any kind of path forward, any kind of defining way forward to actually establishing that state. Right now, we're looking at a heap of rubble. How can we build from the bottom up rather than making declarations? The United States is trying to kind of use this to pivot, to create some diplomatic momentum and say, look, if there is going to be a Palestinian state, Israelis, why don't you jump on the train and join this mega deal with Saudi Arabia, which we've been pushing, right, which would normalize relations for you with a major Gulf power. We create a power dynamic, a security pact with Saudi Arabia, and we can get going on the sort of goal that we were pursuing before October 7th, before Hamas spoiled it, which is greater regional integration and economic, prosperity for all.
And on that note, what do you expect the U.S. to do as a result of these developments?
Well, they're doing what they've always been doing, which is balance, right? On the same day that Jake Sullivan pushed back and said this was not productive, this declaration of independence, they also pushed back on the Israelis and said withholding tax revenue as a form of punishment to the Palestinian Authority is also not constructive. You saw it in Secretary Blinken's testimony on the Hill, where he had the right-wing senators kind of wagging their finger at him from the podium, where behind him, they had the left-wing demonstrators waving bloody hands behind him. This is the line that Biden has been walking. It's a tightrope with no net, but I think his conscience is guiding him.
Okay, we'll leave it there for now. Middle East analyst Laura Blumenfeld in Washington, D.C. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you.